Welcome to another edition of the Good Eye Podcast. I'm Jay Smack, and today my guest, which I will get into in just a moment. I'm not going to drag out this intro because the conversation we have says it all. His name's Joel Morgan, and Joel Morgan is a lot of things and does a lot of things. He's a coach, he's a relationships coach, a life coach, he's a pastor, he's a philosopher, he's a thinker, and he's a guy that's honest with himself. And he came to realize a lot of things a number of years ago, and those realizations helped him basically will himself into a life of, I want to say positivity. It's not necessarily a life of positivity, but it's a life that says, look at life with the most positive attitude you can and learn from every interaction. And that's kind of what this podcast is about. The name Good Eye Podcast means looking at life with your good eye, as if you have a good one and a bad one. So I promise not to talk too much in the beginning so we can get into the conversation. So I'm going to shut up now. And this is part one of hopefully an ongoing conversation with Joel, because he's a fascinating guy with a lot to say and a lot to leave you thinking about. So here it is, this part of my conversation with Joel Morgan on today's Good Eye Podcast. All right, cool. And here we are on another Good Eye Podcast. And my guest today is someone that I'm really excited to have a conversation with, because that's why this show was born. I love good conversation. I love open, intellectually honest conversation. Now, Good Eye Podcast usually revolves around nonprofits or inspiring stories, people doing inspiring or positive things, because there's enough negativity out there. But it was originally started to have these open, again, intellectually honest conversations about things that we're curious about, which is surprisingly difficult, especially these days, to have an exchange of ideas between people who are open-minded. And I'm really pleased to welcome Joel Morgan to the Good Eye Podcast. And I don't even know what we're going to get into, Joel, but I'm sure it'll be cool. How are you, man?
I'm doing great, man. Yeah, and I feel exactly the same way, Jay. Like from the few conversations that we've had offline recently, have just really enjoyed an exchange of ideas and good questions and going down the rabbit hole. So I'm hoping we dig deep today. All
right. Well, let's do it, man. The first thing I want to hit, though, is your new podcast. I saw that it was about to drop and wanted to get you on to talk about it. And we had talked about it previously on another podcast, and it's called Dropping Keys. And I love the title. It's based on a quote or a poem by Hafiz, correct?
Yep. And Hafiz was a 14th century Persian poet and mystic, and his stuff is out there. And yeah, Dropping Keys is a poem that really opens up a lot of things in a very quick and short writing. And so it goes something like this. And I won't get it perfectly correct, but it's: the small man builds cages for everyone he knows, while the sage, who has to duck his head when the moon is low, keeps dropping keys all night long for the beautiful, rowdy prisoners. And when I heard that poem for the very first time and read it, it opened up something in me, for me, that I don't know. It just touched me in a really interesting way. And I thought this could be the basis of a podcast. What a great way to start up a podcast every time, and to have amazing conversations with people about the cages and keys in their lives, and who the sages are, and who the small man might be, and then wherever it goes from there. And so, yeah, so it's called Dropping Keys, and it officially will start dropping probably late July, early August. Secret hint to whenever you publish this. If it's before then, the volume 0, which is where I started, volume 0, which is my conversation with co-conspirator Valley Haggard, is actually out there. It's on Apple and Spotify, and I'll have a place for it on my website soon. But it's actually out there, the first conversation, and I've had a couple people listen to it, and I'm really excited about this project because it has opened up some cool conversations with some really, and it's conversations with real people in the real world. And that's what I talk about. You and I share this. I think I've listened to a lot of podcasts. I've read a lot of people, sort of the superstars of our time. And I'm really tired of hearing from a guy that lives in a Manhattan townhouse. I mean, they some of them are wonderful, wonderful people, but I just love talking to people that are building something right here, right now, and they're just trying to get it done, and they're doing beautiful, amazing work. And what I love to hear is the person behind all of that. In the conversations I'm having with folks, they're like, man, that was really personal. I'm like, well, yeah, that's what it's supposed to be. And so it's really good. Anyway, that was a sort of a long answer to a short question, but I'm really excited about this podcast project. I think I'm getting to amplify some voices that I don't think, like you're trying to do, similar thing. I'm getting to amplify some voices of some people that might not have their praises sung from on high, and they might be right in your local community. And what I'm really excited about is I can't wait till it gets going and I get to talk with people all around the world, because that's what I want to hear. I want to hear from people in Italy. I want to hear from people, in France. I want to hear people in countries in Africa and, South America. I mean, I really want to hear what's it like for you, and what are you doing there, and what are the keys to life? I can't wait to, especially internationally, I want to see how, if they differ.
So do you see now the people who you're going to be talking to, they're dropping keys, but the prisoners from the quote, are they, in your eyes, unwilling/unwitting prisoners who have been not only caged by, the small man who meets everyone and has to put them in a cage, but are they also unwittingly and unwillingly caged by convention and thought structure that perhaps they hadn't considered or taken to heart?
Yeah, I think it's all of that. I think it is all of that. And we, in the conversations, we get into, well, who is the small man, right? And what's so interesting is that so far in the 6 or so conversations I've been able to have officially, oftentimes what we realize is the small man is us.
Yep.
We build our own cages. And like you say, whether it is a thought process or a convention or a cultural understanding that we just were raised with, or that we fell into, or that we participate in some way. It is fascinating. And then what I love about these conversations, and then I have the conversation, and then the next week, and then I go back and I listen to that conversation, and I take one of those keys and I do a deeper dive on one of those keys. Now that deeper dive might be a 10-minute dive. It might be 15 minutes. Might be 6, but I take one of those keys and I just talk about it in a different way and try to unpack it a little bit more and give it something more, because it's really been fascinating to go back and listen and to realize the things the keys that were dropped that we didn't even talk about, that were in the meat of the conversation, but they sort of got passed over, and then to go back and pull out a couple of those and talk about them. And so, and they're not, and of course, me, I'm a bit of a rebel. And so I'm often taking things that they said that we wouldn't normally think of as keys to life, and taking a deeper dive on them. Actually, the last one, I can't remember which episode it'll be, but the last one I did was an anti-key. So it was the reverse of a key. So that was kind of fun too.
That's interesting. So, I'll look forward to see what that's all about.
Yeah. I think it's going to be, it's fun, and I'm having a good time with it. And I just, and like you, I love meeting people. I love talking to them about, I like having real conversations. I don't, let's cut through the bullshit. Can I say that?
Please, please do.
I cut through the stuff and let's get to it, and I just love that. I love it.
It's interesting you call yourself a rebel, because that is one of the reasons I love talking to you. And I was excited about getting you on here, because I think what you're really getting at is that you're open to just about anything. And as we mentioned a few seconds ago, people like to put things in categories and square pegs, square holes, round pegs, et cetera, et cetera. Let's not deviate from any sort of belief system. But you are a minister, you lead people, but you're also open to any sort of philosophical possibilities that you can use, hence here we go full circle, into as a key, as something that you can take from. Because I get really impatient, and there's a that's ironic because I'm about to bring up Zen Buddhism. There's a really fine line between, motivational posters, the next hill you see is the next opportunity. Every failure is an opportunity to succeed. All that stuff. It's great. And it's true. But there's a fine line between that and true inner work and true spirituality. And I'm not qualifying. I'm not saying this is better than that. Whatever it takes, whatever it takes for you to get through the day and find inspiration and motivation, that's good for you. But there's a lot of both. And I think that's what you were talking about when you mentioned the people in the ivory towers who are trying to provide inspiration. What's your experience with you being a Christian leader? Because of a title, you need to have a title. We need to put labels on everybody, but also being open to all philosophies. And how does that work for you as a Christian leader?
Well, I think it works great for me as a Christian leader because it's my path, and I would not be, in my opinion, I would not be as effective as I am as a pastor, being able to relate to so many walks of life as I have to, and as I've chosen to do with the work that I do as a pastor. If I had not gone down a lot of the paths and continue to try to keep an open mind, even about my own faith and about how I understand how that even works in my life. I think and I don't like being pigeonholed. That's one of the things I actually struggle with is it's often been hard for me to own that what people often call me, which is pastor, right? And it's interesting living in Virginia because we're between the Falwells and the Robertsons. And to Lynchburg and Virginia Beach, and they have these very conservative Christian empires, and I don't align with them. And so when you say around this area, when you say you're a pastor, people then try to figure out what camp you're in, because they either think you're a jerk and that you're a complete phony. And a hypocrite, or they need to figure out, well, what kind of Christian are you? Because are you the right kind of Christian? Meaning, are you part of the right denomination? And around here, the denomination I'm a part of is seen as well. Around here, the denomination I'm a part of is seen as quite liberal, which, in all actuality, we're very moderate. But because of some stances we've taken on the LGBTQ issue specifically, we've been seen as too liberal and not Christian. There are people out there who have said to my face, "Well, you guys aren't even Christian anymore. You don't even believe in Jesus anymore because you guys allow gay people to be married in your churches, and you can ordain them as your elders, and they can be your ministers." And so I don't know where I was going with all that, but I just talked a lot about that. But being between that, it's hard. Mm-hmm. It's hard to then say, because you're a pastor. So I've often had a hard time sort of owning that here, because sometimes I just don't want to get into that conversation, because it often ends up being people have already started at a place where they've got you in a cage and you're not getting out no matter what you say. And so anyway, because I'm pretty open, if I get the conservative Christian person, man, they just like to light me up because I don't fall into their categories very much. So I can usually make some headway, not with an atheist who's really hardcore. I can't make any headway with them either, because I'm a Christian and I'm just wrong. So anyway, so it's interesting and hard. But being open to things is, it's made my life a lot better. I think my faith is much more durable than a lot, because it's not. I don't think anyway, and I challenge this a lot. I don't think it's built on beliefs or ideas that are so delicately constructed that anything is going to blow it up.
Yeah.
I think there are people that man, their faith is so delicately constructed that if you challenge any part of it, then man, they just freak out. They can't handle it. And I'm not a person that's gonna, that I don't want to do that. I don't want to necessarily, unless somebody's challenging me, I don't necessarily want to attack somebody else's faith. I may want to have a conversation about other things, but anyway, so yeah, it's interesting. And I just believe that truth is truth wherever you find it. Right. Whether it's Zen Buddhism, whether it's in the, I mean, if there's truth in the Book of Mormon, then there's truth there. And I'll here, full disclosure, I haven't read much of the Book of Mormon, actually. I probably should do that sometime just to know what
I've seen the musical.
Says.
So that kind of,
yeah, I saw the musical and I'll never do that again. But anyway, that thing was crazy. Oh yeah, that was hilarious.
Well, it seems also that you would be more likely to be a place that seems inviting for people who may be curious about checking out a church because you're open to so many things. And when I say open, I'm not trying to step on any toes as far as any dogma or schools of thought or religion. I'm just saying conversation. We can disagree about anything and still have a conversation, and that's how we learn. And I mentioned, I don't remember if we were recording yet or not, but Thich Nhat Hanh, but I did mention Buddhism. One of my favorite books is Living Buddha, Living Christ. And all he's really doing in that is talking about how there's so many of the same messages in all these schools of thought and all these religions and all these philosophies. And we don't have to mean each other harm. Of course, taken to extreme, you can find an intention to do harm in almost any teaching whatsoever.
Absolutely.
But yeah, conversation, which goes, I guess that's really the theme of what we're talking about. It's so meta that the theme of our conversation is conversation. But I can't wait to see who you have on the podcast and what kind of conversations you have there. But I don't want to just back you into that corner because you do so much. You're a life coach. You help people through tragedy and loss. Do you bring much of the teachings of your faith into that, or sometimes do you not go into those worlds? And what is it that might seek people who? There's two questions for you. Are many of your clients in your congregation, or do people come to you from outside? And what more often than not causes them to seek out a life coach?
Yeah, so I think that most of my official clients are outside of the congregation. I mean, I use all my coaching training and all of that, and with folks, with the way that I lead the congregation, with everything that we do here. Anytime I have an informal conversation with somebody, it often turns into a coaching conversation. If that's something that I think that will help draw them out and help them heal or help them move forward or whatever. And so most of my clients are outside of the congregation. And so the best life coaches, the best coaches, period, if they're real coaches and not consultants. And because here's the difference for me. A counselor helps you deal with your past so that you can get to your present. So you can sort of wipe the slate clean and have a solid foundation for your present. A coach looks at your present and helps you move forward to whatever sort of ideal state or whatever you're trying to create, wherever you're trying to move through or move to. A consultant is someone who is a subject matter expert, and you say, hey, Jay, I need to figure out how to build an email list, or I need to figure out a marketing plan, or I need to figure out how to make my sales better or my supply chain. So a consultant comes in, talks with you, works with you, and then gives you, well, here's what you need to do. In my opinion, true coaches are those people who don't say, here's what you need to do. They help you figure out what you need to do. And most of the best coaches believe that you already know what you need to do. Their job is to create a space and a place to help you find it and then hold you accountable to it so that you can begin going through, because you know how it is, man. I mean, you can talk to somebody for 5 minutes. You can go, I know exactly what they need to do. And you can tell them to do it. And it's not going to be as powerful for them, even if they go do it, than if you've led them in a conversation and in a path where they discover it. And they're like, oh man, I didn't really see that before. They discover it. You're not leading them to it. They might discover something you never saw, and then they take off with it, and you're like, that's super cool because they've wrapped themselves around it. That's for me the difference between being inspired and being motivated. There are great motivational talkers out there. You can listen to a motivational speech every day and get all fired up and whatever. And that usually lasts for about 24 hours, in my opinion. But inspirational people or inspirational things often come from within. They might get unlocked by somebody else, but they come from within, and then you're inspired. And of course, if you go back to the root of the word, it's in spirit, which means there's some other sort of spirit that has not taken you over, but you're participating with now that keeps you going. And that's what I love about the saying, inspirational speaker rather than a motivational speaker or something like that. So most of my clients are outside, and why do they come? Well, a lot of clients come to me usually at some transitional or tipping point in their lives. You've got a late 20s professional who, they're into their second job maybe already, and they're like, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Like, I don't know. Like, I'm out here now. I did all this training. I did all this college. I did all the right stuff, but now here I am, and I'm not really sure this is it. Or you've got the 35-year-old who did all the traditional things, right? High school, college, first job, maybe second job. They've got the car, they've got the house. Maybe if they're, they've got a life partner, maybe they've got children, and they look around and they go, got everything I thought I was supposed to have. Is this it?
All the boxes are checked.
Yeah, all the boxes are checked, and now I'm not really sure and so then there's that, and then they're just, and then there's the one that's recently been happening a lot that I really realize is big is the 40-year-old male or the 40-ish-year-old male. A lot of 40s have often been called the decade of regret, because you're just old enough to have done a bunch of stuff and or not done a bunch of stuff. And so you regret the things that maybe you should have done or you think you should have done. I don't like the word should, but and you're beginning to see that you might be locked into some things that you're not really happy about. And so you're trying to figure out how to really create that next part of your life. I mean, it really is about why are my relationships like this? What do I want out of this? Where am I going? Yeah, maybe, I have a client right now. I mean, he's built a wonderful business. He's doing really well, but he's just like, I thought things would be better. Like, okay, let's dig in here, and some of that, I mean, some of that is just helping to reprioritize sometimes, but you need a space and a place to do that. And generally your best friend, your spouse, your dog can't really help you with that. You need a professional. You don't need a counselor for that, in my opinion. Some counselors are really good about that kind of stuff, but counselors really are mostly trained to help you deal with, and I don't mean this to be pejorative at all, but daddy, mommy issues or whatever, history issues, things that have happened to you that influence how you're operating today. And so sometimes you need that as well. But to move forward, you really need, I think, a true coach. And that's what I do, is to really help people move. So it's those sort of inflection points. Also, then it's the 63-year-old who's like, retirement's coming. And I'm either going to be forced to retire or I want to retire. And I've worked my whole life. Wow, what does that even look like? Because I'm not a guy who's going to be on the golf course every day, or whatever. Or I'm not a woman who's going to take up knitting or, or whatever some traditional idea of retirement would be. So sort of those kinds of things. And so what I've begun saying about my coaching and about my speaking and about the podcast and all that is that my thing is that I help to wake people up for a living, meaning wake them up to their life. And that I want to inspire and instigate important conversations for communities and for individuals to help them move forward. That's my life's work. I think I've finally put it into words. Are those two things that I wake people up for a living, and then I inspire and instigate important conversations for people and organizations to help them move forward. And I love it. Like it's super fun.
So people see you and they say, I need some help, and they come to you, they naturally assume, because they have all of the questions and none of the answers, that you have all of the answers, and that you have always known what you're going to do, and you've always been happy. But that can't possibly be the case, I would imagine. What do you look to other than your faith, which is kind of a trick and unfair question, but how do you maintain happiness? How do you talk yourself into the day? I mean, you look for keys, obviously, but it sounds like when you help people, you either know the answer and help them realize it, or you go on that journey with them to figure it out and unlock what it is, who they are, who they're really looking for. But, physician, heal thyself. What do you do, Joel? And
I don't know if I've actually been anywhere where I've shared my story with you, Jay. So I grew up on a dairy farm out in western Nebraska. We milked cows 3 a.m. and 3 p.m. every day, 365 days a year. One of the things I'm not is lazy. I'm a hard worker. I learned that early on, almost to my detriment. Sometimes I've had to really in the knowledge business, which is really what I'm in now. You can't work 24/7 like you could on a farm. Anyway, that's an aside. We can talk about that later. Stable household. My parents are still married to each other. Have a pretty good relationship, all throughout. I'm sure it's been rough. They've been married over 50 years, so it's and ran a farm together and all that. And so, I got toward the end of high school and I started dating this girl, and it was probably really maybe not the first serious relationship I had, but pretty close to that, and thought I was in love. And hey, if you're in love, you're supposed to get married and you're supposed to, settle in and go to that. Well, so I graduated high school and I got married that summer, and I had a full ride to a state university in Nebraska, not the university, but to a state university. And so we moved to the town where I was supposed to be, and I didn't have a typical college experience. We rented a house. We were married. She started working in the food industry, because that's what in restaurants, and I was working in restaurants as well, and going to college full time. And she was the child of two alcoholics, and I didn't have any idea what that meant. And so I think how some of that worked out for her was it was difficult for her to trust people that they were actually going to be around. And so she, within the first 6 months of us being married, she was sleeping with a bunch of other guys. And one of them was, quote unquote, my best friend. And so that, less than 2 years into our marriage, we're divorced. It was rough, man. That was because my whole world was based off of this belief that you find your soulmate or whatever, and that's it, and you're done, and you're there for life. And that's the kind of attitude I had. Well, then, it had to end, because it was, she was not faithful and wasn't going to be faithful. That was the other thing, was we tried to work some things out, but again, we were 18, for God's sake, I don't even, my poor parents. Anyway, so then, got married at 18. By 21 and a half, then I had survived 2 suicide attempts. I spent a week on a psych ward, on a stabilization psych ward, was released from that with no diagnosis and no treatment plan, which still happens today, by the way, Jay. It's our mental health care system in this country it's wackadoodle. I do not understand why we are unwilling to spend money on mental health care, but that's another issue that we can talk about later. And so I went back to college, but I transferred colleges, and anyway, had made a lot of change, but survived those 2 suicide attempts, no treatment plan. So I make it through college, and then I end up getting remarried. And then when she graduated from college, which is a few years after I did, decided I was going to go to seminary, because my faith had disappeared in that 18 to 21 year period, that period of time, because I was like, there can't be a God if this is the kind of shit that happens to
So
me.
I don't want to interrupt you, but are you headed towards seminary because you're searching, or did you grow up a religious person?
Oh, good question. Yeah. So I grew up. My mom, we went to a Lutheran. We went to Lutheran church I think I could probably count on my less than two hands the Sundays I missed in 18 years. Growing up at home in a Lutheran church, I was president of the youth group. When I was in high school, my pastor pulled me aside and said, "I'd really like you to consider becoming a pastor. You've got some gifts and skills that I see that would be good." And I'm 16 or 17. I'm like, what does that even mean? That's graduate school. Like, I'm not thinking about that, But my mom says that she knew I was going to be a pastor from the time I was 7 years old. She just could see it. And I was like, that's weird, but okay. I mean, now as a parent of a 21-year-old and a 17-year-old, like I can see where you, as a parent, you see things and you have these little noodlings, and then it's funny how some of those actually come to pass. So grew up in a religious household. My dad, not so much, but my mom, yes. And so I was seeking, and then during that time after sort of in between there, I studied Zen Buddhism for a good while, and 6 months, 8 months probably, but really did the deep dive, was practicing every day. I had a community that I was in connection with. And,
this is all making sense.
Did all that, did all the stuff, and was an atheist for a while. And then, so here's the story of how I come back to Christian faith is, I'd grown up on a dairy farm, and we'd grown up rodeoing and having horses. And so there was a Lutheran camp that came recruiting, and they had horses as part of the camp, and they needed wranglers. They needed people to take kids on rides and teach them how to care for horses and all of that. And I don't think they asked me if I believed in God, and I didn't tell them I didn't. And so then they brought me. And so here's all these college students at this Lutheran camp, and they're just as screwed up as me, but yet they have this sort of faith in Jesus. And it was just it was weird, it was very strange, but it brought me back into the fold, I guess, into the Christian fold, but now it was mine. Before, I think it was my parents' faith, because I think that's sort of naturally how it happens, I finally took it on for myself and began to live into whatever that meant. And then as I was sort of meandering in college trying to figure out what I was going to do, I ended up with a degree in English literature and theater for secondary education. So I'm actually trained as a high school teacher as my background. But I just really, when I did my student teaching, I was like, this is not it. And so I just kept kind of eliminating things, and that seminary thing was just, it kept sitting in there. And so finally I was like, well, I need to start talking to some people about this more seriously. I'd been involved with the campus Christian group after I came back from that camp and all of that. And so I was pretty heavily involved there, and they had encouraged me to consider seminary. So I went back and took some classes at the college I'd gone to that my wife was still going to, because it was a religious school, or religious based school. So I had a good religion department, and I took some languages and whatever. And then I went to seminary, and it was in seminary that I found out that I was clinically depressed. Go figure.
Oh, how did that happen?
Yeah, I don't know how that happened.
No, I mean, how did you find out?
Well, I just felt crappy all the time, or a lot of the time. I would get in these dark places. My wife would come home, and I'd have all the lights off in the middle of the day, and I'd be sitting in the dark. And she'll tell you, she's more like Nurse Ratched. She'd be like, get off your butt, turn on the lights, and quit feeling sorry for yourself. Basically, maybe not quite that harsh, but. And so she was like, you got to go talk to your doctor about this, because you got to do something. So I, again, checking off the check boxes, like I checked all the check boxes, and she's like, okay, well, here's some pills, go find a counselor, good luck. And I did that for like 15 years. I had some decent counselors over those years, and they were very helpful. Medicine, somewhat helpful. FYI, this medicine that we're getting prescribed is really meant for short-term relief. It's not really meant to be taken for decades. Nobody's really telling you that.
Oh man.
Yeah, it's a mess. I've done a lot of reading on that, especially recently. But so 8-9 years ago, I again was not. So now just think about this. So fast forward a little bit. I go to seminary. I'm successful in seminary. I come out. I I have a church. I'm married. We have a couple kids. I'm here in Richmond, Virginia now, and so we're taking this church from this traditional kind of church that it was, and beginning to form it into whatever it is it's become, and all that looks great on the outside. On the inside, I'm often riding the roller coaster of just, I feel good for a while, and then I just feel like I'm in a hole for a while. And it had gotten a little worse. And so I went back to my doctor here, and I was like, okay, he was just being who he is. Right. And he says, okay, we're going to mix up the drug cocktail. We're going to find something that works. And I was
treating the symptoms,
something in my brain broke that day. Like it was almost instantaneous, because I was like, there is no way in hell I'm going to take more pills. I'm done with this. I've got to figure this out. And so it was so funny that, so I just had sort of gotten introduced to some of Tony Robbins' stuff, and he has this teaching on identity. And he basically said, people say you can't, people say it took me 10 times to quit smoking. He says, no, it didn't. It took you the one time you decided that you were no longer going to be a smoker.
Yeah. Decisions.
And you followed that up. And so I thought, and he said, you can decide, you can change anything. Basically, that's his contention. And I didn't know if I believed him, but I thought, maybe if I say I'm not clinically depressed, and that I decide I will never call myself that again, and I begin living like that, meaning every day I get up and I figure out ways, I think about how I want to feel, I think about how I want to think, and I begin changing my thinking, that'll work. Well, that I changed my life. I mean, literally that teaching, and then all the things that I did to do that. And I'm finally getting to answer your question now. It took my whole life story to get to
makes sense.
Answering your question, which is, how do I wire my brain up? Every day at some point during the day.
You asked it better than I did.
What's that?
You asked that question better than I did.
Oh, every day, at some point during the day, I meditate. I do not immediately, but pretty soon in the morning, I do some gratitude journaling, which has become this huge thing now. And a lot of people think it's BS, but it's just been proven scientifically that the more you pay attention to what we're doing right now, which is trying to find good things to talk about, good things to see, the more good things you will see. And so every day I get up and write down 3 things that I'm grateful for, and I do a couple other things. I meditate, and I try to do at least 10 minutes of free writing every day, and most of that is just, some of it's writing to write for something, some of it's writing just to process the day. But everything I'm doing is I'm charting a path in the pathways of my brain to more positive things, because what neuroscience says is the more often you go to certain emotions, you create super highways to those emotions. So if you're a person that gets angry a lot, you've got a super highway that's connected to that anger. And so that's where you go. Someone cuts you off in traffic, you're flipping them the bird and you're screaming at them. Well, that doesn't do any good. They can't hear you. Maybe it makes you feel good. I never thought it did. But to change that, you're going to have to create a different pathway and basically break that other one down. And so that's what I've done. And it is not for the faint-hearted. It would be a lot easier if there were a magic pill out there that I could take and just wake up happy. And I think happiness is overrated sometimes, because happiness is pretty fleeting and it happens in many wonderful places. But for me, the gratitude and joy are words I would use more, because I think joy is a much deeper kind of a thing. You can have joy just sitting somewhere and having a good laugh with friends, and you might feel happy in that moment, but or just sitting with your kids around the dinner table, having a serious conversation. There's a joy in that that's different from happiness. But so that's what I do. So every day, I mean, it's pretty simple now. And I exercise almost every day. Again, proven to combat any of those kinds of things, and it helps you live longer too, by the way. But,
yeah, all of that is the word I keep coming back to, and I love that you said joy and gratitude, because gratitude is the foundation for joy, and gratitude can be and this is the word I'm talking about, practice. Everything is a practice. And I'm saying practice as in meditation and medicine. You practice it in as you do it every day, even if you don't want to, even if it doesn't feel good, and not necessarily every day, but you do it consistently. Right. And those superhighways, you build those superhighways. You're exactly right. But that's amazing. So you know of what you speak, obviously. And when I asked you the question, I felt like it wasn't fair because I was like, except for your faith, because that is a cornerstone for so many people. And faith is just like practice, and I'm not saying faith as in, I know everything will turn out all right, just that it's as long as you are here and you are doing the practice, things will be as good as they can. And by that, I lean toward the Zen, the Buddhist view of suffering. Life is suffering. That doesn't mean you have to suffer constantly. It's just no cakewalk. And we have to acknowledge it and treat it as such just to get through the day. But you definitely know of what you speak. And I'm sure you draw on a lot of those experiences when helping your clients. Does that story come up very often with them?
Well, oftentimes what's interesting is that I will be somewhere at a meeting, or I'll be a speaker somewhere, and people will hear my story, and that will be the thing that they say, that's when I decided that I wanted you as my coach, because I knew that you were real. I knew that you were approachable. I knew that I had a feeling you weren't going to judge me and tell me what to do, that you were going to be someone who really would sit with me and help me figure some things out. And so, it's a gift that way. And I was just, when I had a client earlier, I said, one of the things that I've known her for a while, and she just became a client recently. I said, one of the things that people often have said about me is that I'm very approachable, that when they meet me, or even when they encounter me online or whatever, they just get this sense that, and she used this word, she says, I just sense that you are non-judgmental. And I said, I do plenty of judging, but I mean, we all do. But I said, but I like to meet people where they are, because I just think we don't have enough of that in the world, that I just want to, even if I don't agree with you, even if whatever is, if we can come together, I may think some things, but I'm just here with you, and that's where I want to be, and I don't need you to be anything other than who you are right now. That sort of thing. That's how I try to sort of live my life, and I just try to be where I am, which is a super hard thing to do, just to be where you are. And I love that you used to talk about practice, because that's what I got from Buddhism, and that's something I'm trying to bring into our congregation and we're beginning to develop classes around this now. Is that instead of, like, if someone is exploring the Christian faith and they come to our church and they're like, I really like this community and I want to know more and I want to whatever. Instead of us saying, okay, well, here's a book about Jesus, right? Here's the Bible. Let's just start reading that together, and then you'll learn about him. I wanted us to go the route of, well, let's learn how to pray. Let's learn how to meditate. And we'll teach some of the theology and the thinking and the belief system in and around and behind that. Let's start out with a practice, because what's so interesting is there are so many Christians who don't pray regularly, and they don't really feel like they know how to pray, or they don't really know even how to worship, like in a corporate worship setting. They think it's a TV show that they're supposed to just come and watch. Well, it's very different than a TV show, even though, when you see me on Sunday mornings now, because I am on TV basically, because we're live streaming everything, it can sort of look like that, but that's not what it is. And then how do you study, like, and so practices, trying to get practices back into the Christian faith, because as a faith, it is a practice. I mean, it is ought to be a day. So there ought to be daily practices that you have with it. And again, those daily practices saved my life. I don't know where, I know I wouldn't have tried to kill myself again, because I made that promise to myself after the second time. I said, I've never crossed that line again. But it was bad. And I wouldn't have the joy that I have in the relationships that I'm in. I wouldn't have the joy. I don't think I'd have the longevity that I have at this church if I hadn't been able to have the opportunity to fix myself, all that sort of thing. And now I get to do that with other people. I get to be alongside of other people when they are dealing with stuff and when they're coming through things. I mean, today I had somebody who, she's dealing with the loss of both of her parents. She's an orphan now. And granted, she's in her 60s, but that's a hard thing to grapple with. So I'm not a grief counselor, but we're talking about how moving forward now. Like how do you go from here to there? What do I want to be when I grow up? So,
well, anyway. much like a relationship, and you do some relationship coaching and counseling as well. How much of what you do with/for people is just listening? Because you said you want to meet people where they are. How much of that is just them getting out to someone or something, whatever it is, what's inside that they've been just carrying around? Do you find that sometimes when it starts coming out, you can't stop it?
Yeah, and a lot of times you don't want to stop it because you've created a safe place, a confidential, safe place where they can say whatever they need to say, and as you well know, there are places where we can't say things that we need to say, and so to create that space for them, and a lot of times that's what I'll say. Well, tell me about what would be helpful today, and sometimes people say, well, you know what, today I need to get some things off my chest. Like I need to speak these into the air, and then later maybe we'll talk about how that influences the rest of the stuff we're doing. But whatever. And so it's just and we don't have that. We don't do a very good job with that. You see lots of things about active listening out there, but most people don't do it very well. Most people really aren't listening. They're just waiting for their turn to talk, and that's something that in the program I went through that we spent a lot of time being critiqued on listening, basically, so that we had to, as we were listening, we had to be able to report back things that we heard, and so we learned how to perk our ears up and to try to shut off that part of our brain that wants to just go back and forth all the time. And so it is a lot of listening, and I love it. I love the work because people are just infinitely fascinating to me. And the other thing that I just love is and I think I said this in a previous podcast that we were on together that I think my superpower really is perspective. So I always think of people's lives like a diamond, and oftentimes, sometimes if you look at a diamond on one facet, it might look kind of dull. But if you just click it over a click, to the next little facet, it lights everything up. And sometimes that's all you need. All you need is for someone to help you just look at something just a little bit differently, and boom, you're like, oh, wow, I didn't even know that was possible. Yes, it is. And guess what? It's already in you. So what do you want to do about it? And those are super fun conversations, or just the one where it's just like, yeah, okay, they just get it. And so I'll never forget, I had a client who when she was 14, the love of her life was murdered, stabbed 14 times. It was horrific. And she fast forward 12 years, she's 26. And she comes to me, and she's been to counselor after counselor after counselor after counselor. And she's just carrying this thing right with her. I mean, can you imagine 14
No.
teenage girls, love of your life, like it's everything, black and white thinking, the whole, just all of that, and then just murdered. It's horrific. Anyway, in 2 sessions, right, we moved her beyond all of that, and in a really wonderful way. And I won't share how we did that, but moved. And it was just to see the catharsis happen in real time, and to see then who she was able to become as a wife, as a mother, all of that, and the freedom that she gained because of this hard work that she had done, that she just, and I think the other counselors she had were good. I don't think that she was ready. Right. But for whatever reason, what we did together in those 2 sessions, it was like she put this book of her life away, and she opened up a whole new one.
I love how you
awesome.
call it hard work too, because man, opening that stuff up and dealing with it and looking at it, when it's all out and exposed and coming to terms with it, that is hard work.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yeah, Jay, I definitely want to come back because I'd love to talk about the hard work. Honestly, about the hard work that all of us are going to need to do now, especially in this time of social unrest and things that we're seeing that maybe some of us are seeing things we've never seen before in the ways that we're seeing them now in terms of our own understandings of things. And it's hard work. And most of us don't want to do it because it's painful work.
Right.
But we have to. If we're gonna move forward as a culture and as a country, we're gonna have to do that work. So
you're right. Yeah. And I think some of the pain comes from seeing that some parts of us, parts of our population are unwilling to do the work at all. And you just know it's going to make it so much harder than it already has been. And so much work should have been done already. I don't like the word should either, but it's apropos there. But I agree with you, and I'd love to have you back, man. I mean, anytime. I hate to take up too much of your time, but we can come pull things apart and, listen. Listen as much as possible.
Exactly. And I'll sort of, as we're wrapping up here for this one, I just say, one of the big things that I've been on recently is I've really had to work on, one, self-compassion. That's one of the ways I've helped fix myself. And two, I've had to work on just compassion, to be alongside of people that I don't like very much, and to try to have compassion for whatever it is that they're going through, whatever they're dealing with, and to try to develop some understanding for how they got to where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not easy work either, because I'd much rather be around like-minded people and who we all think we know we got it figured out and we can just plow on through and whatever. But that's not the world. And
so would the people who need to do the work the most would like to be around like-minded people.
Absolutely.
We'd all prefer that, but that's not the work.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. So,
well, Joel, you're the man. Good luck with the podcast and everything you do, and do please come back. I mean, we didn't even get to stuff I wanted to hit, but I'd love for you to come back anytime you want. Just open this back up.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, sometimes when I'm the guest, I mean, on my own podcast, I try not to talk too much. But when I'm the guest, man, and you ask me one question, you're going to get you might get too much.
I love it. You let me practice my listening.
There we go.
How about that? How about that?
I like it.
Cool.
Very good.
Joel Morgan, and Dropping Keys is the name of the podcast. It'll be out later this year as you ramp up and bank all your interviews. But, man, I appreciate your time and your insight. And peace, brother.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and if you want to check out joelmorgan.com, that'd be awesome. I also have a book on there, Every Single Day, that I wrote in 2017, really wrote it over a few years, but published in 2017. That's on my website as well. You can get it on Amazon. And I'm at Joel Morgan CC, with just the 2 C's after my name, on Instagram and on Facebook. So would love to see any of you guys. Check me out there.
Cool. Thanks so much, Joel.
Thank you. I'll see you soon, Jay.
Okay, so if there is a surface, I think we just scratched it, even though it took almost an hour of scratching. And we will have Joel back real soon. As I told him in an email following up after this conversation, I think he's the first official repeat friend of the podcast, quote unquote friend of the podcast, in that anytime he wants to come by and have a conversation, obviously the door's open. And that could be said for probably a lot of people, hopefully some of you listening. So if you have any questions or if you want to come on, if you have a great topic, hit me up. smackj@gmail.com is my direct email, or you can hit up goodeyepodcast@gmail.com if that's easier to remember. But thanks very much for your time and attention. And until next time, try to look at life with your good eye.